This is the Nassaumen Hockey Podcast with James Nichols and John Zella. We are now joined by Eric Kussin, the co-founder of the SameHere movement, and he's co-host of the Hockey Podcast Network podcast coming out called We Are All a Little Crazy. Eric Kussin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me, John and James.
How you doing? How's everything going? Has the first episode aired yet?
No, so we're talking. I mean, by the time this airs for your audience, we'll be out. So April 16th. So a couple of days from now is when we go with our first episode. And as we get into it, the reason for that is, this topic of mental health, sports, pop culture, we wanted it to be about the shit that's going on, current events, and be able to discuss what our society is talking about. Is it leading us down the right path? Is it leading us down the wrong path? If we just put out a date far in advance and didn't really know what was happening kind of in our world at the same time. So we wanted to make sure that it was timely.
So tell us a little bit about the SameHere global movement and how it connects to hockey, outside of you being a hockey fan, of course.
Sure. So I spent 15 years working in professional sports. I started at the NBA league office, spent a number of years with NBA teams, and then shifted over to NHL teams. And, I mentioned with you guys before, I'm an Islanders fan at heart, but full disclosure, I spent 4 years with the Devils. So
that's okay.
Sales and service department. I think that's much better than doing anything with the Rangers, which I don't think I could have brought myself to do.
That's the right answer.
Yeah, I will. Actually, I got some great stories about our playoffs runs of things I did to Rangers and Rangers fans, not like in an underhanded way, things I'm happy to be public about. But so spent 4 years with the Devils. That had the 2012 Stanley Cup final run, which was one of the highlights of my career, amazing. And then went down to Florida with the Panthers as their chief revenue officer with a new ownership group that purchased a team that is having some nice success right now. I think they're going to be contenders for a while because I really love their ownership group. That's why I went down there for. And 6 months into my tenure there, my brain, my body hit a brick wall like you've never seen before, and I just became dysfunctional. After performing at a high level in an office, and obviously as an athlete before that, ended up spending 2.5 years back in Long Island in Merrick's, laying in my bed in my parents' house that I grew up in, a twin bed at 6'5", 240, just staring at a ceiling, not watching TV, not listening to the radio, just dead to the world as these doctors tried over 50 different psychotropic drug combinations on me, TMS therapy, shooting electromagnetic waves into my brain, and then ultimately shock therapy where they, shock your brain into seizure to try to wake it up. And none of those worked for me. And so the last doctor that I'd seen who was at a psych ward administering the shock therapy actually told me that was my last resort, that treatment. So you can imagine what that feels like to think that that's, you're on your last opportunity. And so, here, Long Island will be part of the hero story here. My parents are both former educators. My father was a principal at Farmingdale High School for 30 years. Mother was a language teacher out in Brooklyn. And so they go to these continuing education courses all the time now that they're retired. And they went to this one on what was called integrative breathing practices. And I didn't know what the term integrative meant. I'd never done a breathing practice before in my life, so it didn't really resonate with me. And my mother came home from the course at night and said, we met this woman, Donna. She lived in Merrick. She's amazing. She practices differently than all these other doctors you've been to the last 2.5 years. We know you're frustrated. We know you're pissed at the last thing you heard. Just please go see her. And so I met with her and I sat on her couch, and she's the first doctor who asked me from the beginning just a very broad question. Eric, can you please tell me about your life? Right? Which was very different than every other doctor I'd been to, where it was, what are your symptoms? Based on your symptoms, here's your diagnosis. Based on your diagnosis, here's how we're going to treat you. So, mentioned growing up in Merrick a couple of times, older brother, younger brother, sports crazed family. So I just start sharing this story, not ever sharing it in this way before, because most people who ask you like how you're doing, it's like, oh yeah, I'm fine, right? Like we exchange pleasantries, or hey, how have your parents been, right? Like you go into that story specifically. This was just a general, tell me about your life. And so my older brother, from the time I was 8, he was 12. This is what my next 15 years looked like. He breaks his femur bone in a sporting accident, is put in a body cast for a year, homeschooled. Heals from that, is diagnosed with ALL, children's form of leukemia. So 5 years of chemo radiation.
Wow.
Miraculously goes into remission after 5 years, and he's in a Jeep Wrangler with his friends on the way to an Islander game. Typical thing that kids do. They get their permit and they think they can drive everywhere. So friends driving erratically on the Meadowbrook Parkway, car loses control. He flies out of the back, no seatbelt, lands on his head, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eyes, in ICU for a month. Heals from that, goes to college, gets diagnosed with a relapse of leukemia. They have to give him a stronger chemo regimen. After a number of months sends his body into septic shock, eventually coma. And so he's at LIJ. We don't know if he's going to wake or if he's got any brain activity. The neurologist telling us they don't know whether we should keep him on the machine or not. We make the decision as a family to keep him going. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, no action. Finally wakes after 3 months. Miraculously has his full cognitive faculties about him. But his kidneys fail from the rigor of the septic shock, so has to go on dialysis. We all get tested to see who's the closest donor match. My father donates a kidney to him. That all ends. I get my job at the NBA league office right out of college, thinking, okay, blank slate, start from scratch. 3 close friends, Merrick, all grew up in Merrick, all passed away from heart conditions, same year, back to back to back.
Wow.
And so what I learned from sharing that story, which was the reaction that she shared back with me, is I grew up on this bed of stress and trauma over those 15 years. But my crash happened at 35, like 5-6 years ago when I was with the Panthers. So who's going to make the connection, especially back in 2017 when all this was taking place? No one was talking about mental health in that way. So I'm not making the connection between the shit that happened to me as a young kid, which I don't even think of as events that impact my mental health. My reaction was, those are things that just happen in life. Like, you deal with it, right? And then you, especially when you come from an athlete world, like, you bank it, time heals all wounds, you lick your wound, and you go on to the next thing. And what was explained to me is how stress and trauma are cumulative, and they build up in your system over time, and eventually, just like plaque, this is the way I describe it now, plaque can build in your arteries and take you down with a heart attack. Stress and trauma can build in your central nervous system and take you down with,
right.
Various disorders, suicidal ideations, unfortunate, symptoms that even if they're not diagnosed are difficult. And I won't go into detail. This will be more of the questions, but you asked the question of then, why was the organization formed? I end up sharing my story on LinkedIn of all places because I didn't have a social media presence. I wasn't a social media person. And it gets shared over 150,000 times in the first 3 days. And I had over 400 calls coming in from as far as China. And what I noticed was the calls that were coming in, no one was sharing disorder labels with me. Instead, everything was a lived experience story of a child being lost to SID, sudden infant death syndrome, and how devastated the father was, or a young woman who was married after having a bad divorce and how the divorce still was impacting her. And that made me realize, like, the common thread that ties us all together is that we all face these challenges in life at younger ages, right? When younger is relative to each of us, and these things compound and build in us and then start impacting us over time. And we start to turn to things. In my case, work was what I turned to. I know we'll get into Theo Fleury in a little bit, but like, people turn to alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling. For me, it was work to escape things that we've been through in the past that are now starting to come to the surface that we've been able to push to the back for so long. And so, in starting this movement, the idea was, why the hell doesn't our society understand this? Like, we're in 2021 now, so I'm having this conversation with you today, and our society still doesn't understand this, even with the awareness that's around it. The topic of conversation is still about depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD. That's what it's all about. It's not about the stuff that we've been through. And why is that? So looking at all these websites, and I'll land the plane now, in 2017, I went to the largest nonprofit websites in our country. And while I think they're all well-meaning and they have great programming, their marketing messages were just off, and they continue to be off. And as someone with a sports marketing background, look at what happens when we go to the playoffs, right? We try to put messages out there as teams that are things like all in, all for one, right? One team goal, because it rallies the team, the fan base, the media all together to root in the same direction, right? Well, when your marketing messages as mental health organizations are 1 in 5 people are mentally ill, you've now created 2 groups. The 1 in 5 people are mentally ill, and the 80+% of the population who this topic doesn't apply to, don't listen to it. You're not in the mentally ill category. you're healthy, fine, normal, okay. That was challenge number one.
There was a good quote that Robin Leonard said, and I'm escaped. I wish I wrote it down because it would have been good to just bring up anyway. At the NHL Awards,
the Masterton Trophy.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a good quote, and I can't remember exactly.
I may be mentally ill, but I'm not mentally weak.
There it is.
That's it. And I think that's important because I think people are really afraid to have those conversations, especially in hockey. This kind of tough guy atmosphere and environment that's been created, where even just the other day, right? PK Subban gets a skate laceration to his thigh, and then he says his caption is "didn't miss a shift."
Yep. It's so the hockey.
And that's I like PK Subban. I think he's good for the sport and all that kind of stuff. That just plays to the environment of the game.
Yeah, and I having worked for the Devils, PK, I can root for him now, as well. And so here's an interesting story about Robin. I haven't shared with you how he and I connected yet, but it fits off of what you just shared about his comments. So the first event we ever did together was in New York, actually, after he had already signed with Chicago. And a reporter asked, Robin, you're very open about the challenges you faced. Do you think you're one of the few players in hockey who deals with challenges like this? Is that why people are, putting the spotlight on you, or are you just more open than most? And he, Robin, being a Swedish guy if you've seen his sense of humor, like he's not bubbly, right? He's just like to the point in a lovable way. And he goes, "Oh, so let me ask you this." And he asks the reporter back the question. Like in this room full of people, he goes, "When I'm in a team and one of the players on the team taps his stick 7 times in the left-hand corner of his locker, and the coach just calls that a routine. Yeah, that's not OCD. That's just a routine. And then when we call up a player from the minors, and he was killing it in the minors and scored 30 goals in the last 15 games, and the first 20 with us, he can't get on the board, and the coach just calls that jitters. Yeah, that's jitters. That's not performance anxiety, right?" And the point he's trying to make there is like, we cover up with these different names because we're afraid of the names, and everyone's dealing with shit, right? Everyone's got their own ways of coping with different things and things that are impacting them. Robin's just more open about it than most people are, and bless him for being that way. But yeah, hopefully that helps answer with, like the stuff that you're seeing with Robin and his openness this is PK himself. Like, if we shift the paradigm to the stories of the stuff we've been through and not the disorders that we have, it becomes an open conversation, and it's a conversation we can all have. And
so how have you used, you're telling us these stories and you're collecting them from the hockey community. I have a kind of a deeper question later on after we kind of go through some Theo Fleury stuff. But how have you used your experience with, to connect with other people and ultimately create the movement? Because it doesn't, I'm a nonprofit guy, I'm a fundraiser.
Sure.
I've done the marketing, so I know how hard it is to make that connection and make it meaningful. And the fact that people were sharing their stories with you is a really good sign, right? That means there's something there that they want to get out there, and that's how you create donors and different things like that. But ultimately, it's how you create impact. Sure. How have you done that? How have you made that connection and used your story to kind of make the movement possible?
Yeah, appreciate that question coming from someone who's got the experience in it. So, when I shared my story and had the reaction to that from everyday people, and realized that if that's the reaction from everyday people, that's a microcosm of, if I share this on a broader scale, how people will react. And so I knew I had the background in sports. I didn't want to start a nonprofit, John. Not that I didn't want to, meaning like,
it's a pain. Life. It's not an easy life. It's not glorious. It's not glamorous. It's very hard.
It is entrepreneurship without the accolades and without getting the early investments to just be able to be like the term bootstrap should be amplified, tenfold for people who are nonprofit CEOs or starters or whatever the term is, right?
I'll send you some articles. We won't go into philanthropy and the issues with some of that here, but I'll definitely share with you some educational articles. Because I've read up on that, and what's the difference between a CEO of a nonprofit and a bank or something like that? It's there's no the compensation is different, but I'll send you. It's very interesting in the difference in how people even just look at that stuff. But continue.
Yeah, well, yes, and some upsides too, right? Like with the tax breaks and all that stuff, which we could talk about. But for me, it was okay. I was going to hand off the sports context that I had to any organizations that were out there in this space, and that was going to be my contribution to helping people. That I'll lend my story when it's asked for, and I'll help amplify someone else's message. And I couldn't find a message out there that was talking about this way, because we live in a society where the disease model and the catastrophic story of NFL players slices his wrist is what draws people in. And so I started looking, interesting you bring up Theo, and I know this isn't the time that you asked about him, but I'll bring him in just because it's part of chronologically how the story came together. My vision for starting then a nonprofit was, if people reacted to my stories in this way, and I'm a nobody other than a sports executive, like I didn't have a chance to play in front of millions of people the way that these athletes or celebrities, because we work with people outside of sports, do. Well, imagine if we got them to band together, and instead of it being about their disorder label, it's about the common life challenges that they face. So instead of the media being able to drive the narrative of Andrew Luck, snowflake, soft, can't play, not tough enough for the sport, throw him under the bus, we don't ever hear from Andrew Luck again. Instead, we could band together with people with platforms where every time a new story comes out, we could say, same here, same here, same here, same here, show that common thread that all this is the underlying bedrock of a trauma thread throughout everyone. There's something magical to that, right? And so listening to Theo's story the way that I did, I was never sexually abused as a child. I've still not been sexually abused. Theo was sexually abused by his male coach. It's one of the most known stories in Canada, unfortunately not that well known in the US. He was 16 years old. It happened over 150 times. Theo wasn't out there saying, I'm a speaker talking about chronic PTSD. I want you to come and learn more about PTSD from me. He could have taken that easy way out and done that. But organically, what happened was he wrote his book 13 years ago, Playing with Fire. And in revealing what happened to him with the sexual abuse, and revealing what happened to him with his parents and their addiction problems, and his mother and the way that she kind of, was a little bit difficult on him for religious purposes, and being really strenuous with way he was allowed or not allowed to act, that became part of what people related to. So Theo was going through this realization of, people relate to my story years before I did, right? But he's talking about it up in Canada. I'm realizing there's a way we got to get athletes to share these stories, and he's the poster child for it. So I reach out to him on LinkedIn. Again, I don't have social media, and all I have is this title that I worked for league offices and for an NHL team before, and bless Theo, he's willing to give me a conversation, right? So if you want me to stop there for a second, I could continue to go forever with that story because Theo is awesome. But
I guess a quick fill-in question there. So how as an organization have you figured out the balance between, because it sounds like you're trying to do two things: amplify messages and have people tell you their stories, and create that space, that safe space. I know that has a negative connotation. It really shouldn't, but create the safe space while amplifying the messages. As a marketer, and then the leader of an organization, how have you, because I'm interested in this kind of selfishly because it's just an interesting concept as a strategy session, but how have you kind of molded these things together, and what kind of success have you seen so far? But even this is before the launch of the podcast and different things like that.
So you'll appreciate this. So it was a vision I had in 2017. I don't want to make it sound like when you say vision, like you think of people like Elon Musk, and right? Like, all I'm saying is there was an idea in my head, right? And this idea was, if visually you're able to show people with platforms making a similar type of sign that shows I'm willing to be open, and you could show the thread of that sign across people with platforms, there's a unification in that. And back to the point that I was making about the 1 in 5, my realization was it's not 1 in 5, it's 5 in 5. And so if you're showing people who have platforms from different backgrounds, different lots in life, grew up in different areas, look different, or in different parts of the world, all making a sign, all sharing their story, that's permission giving to then anyone who reads those stories to say, I get it. Like my story's similar to that, or I can find some similarities in that story where I can now share, and I'm not going to be demonized or looked at as less than, because these people who are sharing, many of them, right? Some of them are still in the midst of what they're, the heart of what they're going through, but many of them went through a crazy period and are now extremely successful and are out on tour and are speaking and are helping people out, right? So it's not this, like the doctor told me, last resort, doesn't work, sorry, your life is over. It's part of character building of what we go through and the challenges we face in life, that when we figure out ways to get over them, we can then propel them and use them to actually gain perspective on appreciating the small things in life, and then looking at new obstacles as they're not even large obstacles at all. And so, to your question, from like a setup in a business sense, that was the marketing message, and we started with that. And then Darren Rovell, the sports reporter who's part of the podcast, organically through the LinkedIn post, right around the time I was talking with Theo, he reached out and he said, this story is incredible. Can I share this on Twitter? Right. So funny little New York, Long Island mom story there is, I told my mom this because Darren's got 2 million followers. Like, this story that I shared on LinkedIn, this guy, he has no right to share your story. Right. Like, that's such a mother thing to say. And I was like, Mom, there's this thing called the internet. Once you put it out there, like it's kind of available to everyone.
I wasn't coerced. I did it on purpose.
Yeah, I did it on purpose, right? And so, Darren and I went to an event down at Drexel where a woman was doing a young woman was a senior in college doing her senior thesis on music and mental health. And she liked the branding that we had created. We're all a little crazy, and SameHere, right? And she said, I think I could draw more people to my event if I use your branding than calling it like a mental health campaign. Which, by the way, side note, no campaign should ever be named after mental health, because when people hear mental health, they think mental illness and it pushes them away. Side note there. And we could dive more into that. We go to this event without anything planned. Darren shows up and was willing to MC it. I bring up a guy who's a recording artist because we were friends with him, and since there was a music component, and then this young woman who won a race and won $1,000 prize she could give to charity, was an Olympic hopeful, and so she came up as well. Without any planning, Darren just kind of MCs it on the fly. I share my story. These two influencers, I guess, if you will, share their story. We've got a psychologist there who's explaining the science behind why we feel the way we do. And the way that the room reacted after that vulnerability was shared, there's only about 250 people in the room, but it was a small room where you really felt contained. And the way people were opening up, it was like people were raising their hands saying, I've had my anxiety my whole life, and I knew I wasn't alone because other people said they had anxiety. But until you all shared what actually goes on in your head with your thoughts and what you fight on a daily basis, I never actually felt part of a group. I now feel like I found my group, right? It was comments like that made us feel like, okay, we're onto something here when there's that level of vulnerability that's shared. And so there was a professor, Dr. Paul Furtow, who worked at Drexel, and he said, Eric, we've worked with all the nonprofits on campus. I've never been to an event like that where from professors on through students in the audience, people opened up like that. Would you consider doing this on a broader scale? And so that on the ride home, Darren, kind of repeated that to me. We were driving back, and he said, we're doing 15 of these on college campuses next semester. This was beginning of 2018, so it would be going into the first semester of the next year, the 18-19 school year. And so Darren put on his Twitter, I created a landing page of what a SameHere sit down on a college campus would be. I got Theo to volunteer. I got a woman named Amani McGee-Stafford from the WNBA, Hayden Hurst from the NFL, a guy named Mark Sherbina who played lacrosse or rugby over in Australia as a national team member, Anita Knoll, who was a swimmer and won a number of gold medals. And I said, guys, here's the vision. I can't pay you anything right now. I said to Darren, I was like, this is going to cost me money to fly people out because these schools, to give us credibility, they're going to ask for this for free. We can't charge for this. Even though we're a nonprofit and we'll take donations, this first one around, they're not going to do it. So he sends out the tweet saying we're going to do a sports meets pop culture meets mental health campus tour. Apply here, right? And it sends it to our landing page. Get 57 schools to apply. We pick 15, everything from Cornell to Michigan to Indiana, but then smaller schools like Richmond and William and Mary and James Madison. And so we do these tours around college campuses. He's 15. And what started to happen was, this is where now developing a social media presence started to help, was I'm not big on putting up on social media, look at me, I'm at Michigan right now, look at me at the big house, right? I think that's a douchey way of talking on social media. No disrespect to people out there who like that strategy. My strategy is, when we're at somewhere, create value, give value to people of what we're learning. So if we're at the big house, what's one of the questions that someone asked Derek Anderson from the NBA, who we brought with us, about, do all athletes who make $30 million actually deal with the same stuff that we do? And what was his answer? And what did that look like, right? And so by sharing our learnings, but being able to put the pictures of all these people making the sign together at all these events, what it enabled us to do is build, I guess, enough of credibility in the college space that then we carved out a K-12 initiative and a corporate office initiative and a sports team initiative. And so back to now, like, your main question is, we've got the safe space for people to be able to share, because we've been able to do that online and social media, that then motivates everyday people to share with, let's say, the protection that people with platforms have shared without getting beaten up for it. Along with the programmatic elements of, we have got 35 different topic levels, and online curriculum will take to any one of those 5 different, pillars of programs, from colleges to offices, et cetera, and start to help create change and culture in your group setting around the topic of mental health.
So would you say that, so that last part kind of answered this question, but what does success look like for your organization? So I know that's like, you could probably go on for an hour and a half
I'll try
and all that kind of stuff. But like that last thing that you said about, creating the initiatives, creating the space for the conversation, initiating those conversations to be had, is that part of the success? And what are a few other items that you would say, if I was a donor or something like that, or something, or a grant application or foundation or something, what are the successes that you're kind of hoping for short term?
Sure. So our mission statement is to normalize society's perception of mental health and make it part of our everyday conversation, right? So what does that mean? So if the 3 of us took a group of 20 Islander fans up on a plane right now, and we're 30,000 feet in the air, and we said, point at the trees that represent what mental health is. You get some people that would point at the fern trees. Some people would point at the evergreen trees. Some people would point at the pine trees, right? And my point is, it's all of those trees together. Mental health is the forest of all of them, right? And so maybe this is lofty, but by using SameHere as a rallying cry, the logo having all the colors in the rainbow in it, right? People with platforms who look all different shapes and sizes, all saying, I'm part of this group as well. One of the best lines I didn't come up with, someone on our board said, he's like, it's a tribe that everyone in the world is already a member of. They just don't know it yet, right? So we don't have the ability to spend billions of dollars the way that Pharma does to put out a message out there that says, take this pill and you'll go in 15 seconds from being a sad face to a smiley face with the blue skies, and
you get the rain clouds from stopping to follow you, and all that stuff.
Exactly. And they, right. And by the way, as much as I'm making fun of that, I bought into that for 2.5 years, right? So, and I'm not bashing medication. I think it's got its place, but medication as a cure and a quick fix is bullshit, right? There's no other way to say that. And maybe I'll get shot down one day for saying that, but it's true. And so, success for me, and it sounds lofty, is that the reason we're forming alliances, celebrities, influencers, doctors on an integrative practice, practitioners, and what we call STAR exercises, which is things like yoga, meditation, mindfulness, breathing practices. We have a CEO alliance. Is okay, if we have this alliance of all these people, and then we, on the other axis, we have all these different brands that we're working with, from the Golden State Warriors to actually the Islanders, to the Department of Defense, to NYPD. Now this intersection starts to happen, where you've got all these people who are on board, who are saying the same thing, using the same language, and you've got these brands that, through those brands, you can start to impact their employees, their stakeholders, their investors, their customers, right? In the case of sports, their fans, which is big reason why getting involved in sports is so important to us. Now, right, what do we hear about marketing? You need to see a message 6 times before it actually sinks in with someone. Well, without billions of dollars, it's very hard to get people to see something 6 times. So we're boots on the ground building this army of people that are talking about mental health in a different way than what our society has seen it before, but all holding hands because they're different stakeholders in this process to say, I'm an integrative and no one has listened to me for 20 years, even though I've been saying this medication is not a cure, right? Eric, you have relationships with sports teams that can help me get out there to speak. I'll donate my time. I'll do it for free if you get me the audience to speak to these people. And so that's kind of the mission, is now kind of going back to that plain view, is we want those trees to look like the 5 and 5 SameHere message, that it's all of us. Mental health is this continuum. And just because one tree looks like depression and another type of tree looks like difficulty getting out of bed in the morning, those trees are part of that same forest. It's just that we're at different places on that continuum, but we all live together, and let's actually hold hands and attack this together.
How has having Theo Fleury part of the movement impacted your organization beyond just, you being a hockey fan and being involved in it professionally? I'm sure he has a lot of fun. Like, I'm sure he adds a lot of value just in different ways.
Sure.
How has that worked out so far? And that's a leading question into something else. But
so first of all, I think of Theo like an older brother right now. Like, as you can tell, I'm opinionated, and you hear me talk. I love being challenged and told I'm wrong, even though I get defensive about it and like to debate, because I think that's fun to be challenged and to think differently about things. And Theo is one of the few people in this space, because there are so many bullshit artists who say that they are life coaches. There's even doctors who are bullshit artists. I'm sorry to say that for some of the doctors who are out there, as evidence of how much I suffered for those 2.5 years and just was told the same thing over and over again. So Theo, having the lived experience, if you take away all of his sports and his accolades and just talk about what he knows about the space, he's a treasure, right? Like he's something that these organizations need. So that's the first half of the answer. The second half of the answer is, what I said to you at the beginning is, I didn't have marketing materials. I didn't have people volunteering at first being like, let me build a website for you for free. And I wasn't going to spend thousands of dollars to do that stuff. So I had an email that explained what the vision was, and I would send that out to people. And when you get a buy-in from a Theo who sees the vision early on and says, count me in, I'm a part of this, well, then Amanda Beard says, okay, I'm willing to do it. And Tyler Hamilton, who's Lance Armstrong's top teammate, says, I'm willing to do it. And John Starks comes to our opening event, and Keith Bullock. Right. And so you need someone who's got credibility early on saying, I believe in this, I champion this. And what that does is it helps you kind of get more people on board from that point.
So having Theo on board, your own involvement in hockey, although, obviously looks a little different than Theo Fleury. And, you kind of touch on some of the things that Theo went through. I'm sure that there are a lot of people that went through something similar. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the drugs and alcohol and things like that. Does his experience reflect a larger issue in the NHL? And how much of that do you think is injury related? And how much of that do you think is more on the mental health side? Because I don't have very many connections to the larger league, but it's, you always hear the rumors of some of the drug use problems and some of the alcohol problems. And it's essentially kids that, they left home at 16 to 18 years old and play a game for a living. And it doesn't mean they don't grow up, right? They have kids, and I imagine many of them lead very, what people would consider normal lives. I know that's a tough phrase sometimes, but you know what I mean?
Yep.
And so how has that been? Is he a microcosm, and there's just more of a spotlight on him? Because aside from having these issues, and I'll let you speak eventually. Aside from having these, he was a very good player, right? So the spotlight's on him, and then he just, even late into his career, like as a New York Ranger, he's scoring 20 goals a season or 30 goals a season.
Yeah, he had a really good year. Yeah,
really, really good. And that's just kind of how he's been. And he came into the league with Calgary. He wins the Stanley Cup in his first season. And then it kind of goes crazy from there. From what you've been able to understand so far, is that a microcosm of what's happening between Robin Leonard, Theo Fleury's, etc.?
If I could add, it's
please,
not just the NHL, the professional sports in general.
Yeah, no question.
Right.
Obviously, each sport. So I'll get to the Theo thing in a second. Let me be only James, because you asked about all the other sports, and then I would even say all of society. But let's just start with sports for a second. My second role at the NBA, the second or third year I was there, David Stern wanted to have someone go to the players and present something that was called the business of basketball, which was how do teams generate revenue? Because when you have Kevin Garnett, who comes from high school and has been told he's amazing his whole life, and you have Amari Stoudemire, who comes from high school and been told he's amazing his whole life, their perception at the time, and I can tell you this because I had these one-on-one conversations with them, was billionaire owner wants me to play for their team, is willing to take millions from their billions to give me my salary. They didn't understand, and who taught them this? It's not fair for them to expect them to understand it, that there's ticket sales, sponsorship sales, arena revenues, TV rights. Those collectively get brought together, and I'm oversimplifying, and that's basketball-related income. And then your salary cap is a percentage of that basketball-related income. And then your rookie scale is a percentage of that salary cap, right? So the more the pie grows, the more your slice. You were talking about slices before, John. The more the slice grows, right? So if players in, this, I was doing this in 2003, 2004. If players that recently, right, didn't understand that side of things, well, then what else didn't they understand? Well, player development, right? And things that are happening off the court, off the ice, right? And so it's so fascinating that you bring up, John, like how good Theo was talent-wise as a player. So, and James, this will play into your comment about all of sports, and then me kind of piggybacking on that and saying all of society. We all gravitate towards what we're better at than other people. I don't want to say great at, right? Because we all have different levels, but like the guy who's a numbers guy gravitates towards accounting. The guy who's a skilled skater gravitates towards hockey, right? Granted, it's much more difficult to be an NHL player than it is to be, an accountant, just numbers wise. That's no disrespect to accountants. So we gravitate towards these things that we're good at. Well, when we're performing, people from the outside, and then even the way that we view ourselves, we see ourselves as performing. Well, Theo performing at 68% of Theo Fleury's capability is still way better than even people in the NHL's 100%. Okay? And most people in the NHL are not performing at 100%, right? Because we're going to get in a second, because most of them are dealing with their own shit also. So they're performing at 85% or whatever it is, if they're not dealing with as much as Theo is, let's say. So if you come in the NHL and you're putting pucks in the net, and you're not doing stuff like I told you, I mentioned some references to our sports growing up. Like if you're not throwing the ball from second base and missing first base like Chuck Knobloch was, right? People don't question you because they're like, you're killing it out there. You're doing awesome. Why then, if you're feeling off in your head, would you think anything differently other than I perform at a high level in everything I do? One, if I just focus on hockey, everything will get better. Two, this other thing that I'm not feeling good about, eventually if I just white knuckle it, I'll get over that thing and it'll eventually get better. That's why we have the mental health problem in our society that we have. Because when we're good at what we do, and I'm guilty of this, right? I'd like to believe an above average sports executive who's getting noticed and moving up in this industry. And I get this position with Florida and it's South Beach and I get to move down. I'm a single guy and I love it out there. Well, I'm performing. I'm bringing in revenue numbers for teams. Teams love that, right? Well, guess what? The fact that I was no longer interested in going to the gym, no longer interested in going out on dates, no longer interested in playing in my own leagues and seeing friends out at bars, I justified them. I said, that makes sense. I have so much going on with work. I have to focus on work now. Those were signals that my brain wasn't functioning from all the shit that had built up inside of me over all those years, that I no longer had the energy and the capacity to be able to perform in those areas the way I was performing at work. So when we're good at something, it's our greatest strength, but it's also potentially our greatest weakness because it gives us blind spots to these other areas that eventually start to take us down over time.
Yeah, I think just to go back maybe to a smaller part of that with just like, again, like the drugs and alcohol in the league and that kind of thing. And then playing off of a little bit of like pain medications and things like that. Have you found that to be, because then, you know, Robin Leonard going through his recovery, Bobby Ryan going through his recovery, Theo Fleury doing the same thing. I don't know if it was after his career was over that he kind of did that, or how his career ended. It was, as much as I remember him as a player, I probably, as a kid, you're just like, the small guy and I'm the small guy. So I'm like, yay, Theo Fleury and Paul Kariya.
Yep.
You know, so can you talk a little bit about that without, you know, I guess respecting people's privacy? You do this for a living, so I imagine you know how to do that professionally, but you know, speaking a little bit about that, because I think people have questions about it.
Sure. And by the way, so Theo always talks about rooting for the little guys himself. And I brought up last night, which I thought you would appreciate, and you would have referenced, is Ray Ferraro. I mean, how could we?
Oh, chicken parm, absolutely. Yeah, it's a little before I would have remembered, but seeing him, being on, you know, him on the Whalers and him on the Islanders, and his role in that '93 run, and the Islanders were the little guy against Montreal, right, or against the Penguins, that they're often recognized as one of the best teams that never won a Stanley Cup.
Yeah,
that '93 run.
We could, don't get me started. If we start talking about '93, I'll be floating. But there was
back for an Islanders focused podcast, and we can just talk about that. And
we will definitely get that coordinated.
I would love that. That gets me going when we talk about anything Isles. So to answer your question, there was a documentary that came out, I want to say it was like 4 months ago, about opioid use in hockey. I actually was at a networking event with a guy who was an equipment manager for Anaheim and for the Ducks, and he got fired. And he revealed a lot in that documentary about what he sees, right? And so let me just say that, like, you know, you said, like, towing the line, John, between, you know, being respectful of people's privacy, but also giving enough to reveal what's going on, is, like, we all heard about the era in baseball that was the greenies, right? Like, you know, go grab a handful of these uppers and it'll get you. How else can guys perform day to day? You're playing every single day in baseball. How can you get up the next day and play after you just played the night before? There is let's just call it a attitude, and then also access in all of these pro sports to quick fixes and shots that can be taken and pills that can be taken to get through pain. Okay. And it's interesting, John, because when I heard the way that I heard you ask the question, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, you could stop me.
Sure.
But you seem to section the question off into, well, there's physical pain and then there's the emotional pain, right?
Well, I think in general, I don't mean to do that like they're different things, but I guess as it leads down a path, maybe it's not different as far as eventually the mental pain kind of sneaks up when you can't perform, and then you're also on pain medication, and things kind of snowball. I absolutely understand that those dots connect.
But it was honest. The way that you asked the question was honest, because it's the way that we as a society think about it. And in fact, when I was starting the organization and talking about the whole 5 and 5 message, people would ask me, oh, well, Dan Carcillo or guys who had head trauma, like, is that considered mental health? And I said, is their mental health impacted? They said, yes. I said, right. So the source of how they were impacted, why does it matter if they're... So now let's go back to then even a step beneath that, which is pain, right? Because I think as a society, we separate the two. But what do we know as human beings? We try to avoid pain in any way we can in order to then move forward, right? So someone taking opioids to avoid the pain in their knee so that they can play is not so different than Theo drinking a bottle of alcohol before or after a game. I don't want to put words in his mouth for him, but in order to be able to perform that night and play, right? Because we want to get to the place where whatever the pain is, wherever the source is coming from, we don't have to deal with it, so we could do the thing that we like, which is in this case, play hockey, right? So I don't separate them in my mind, because to me, it's grabbing at vices that allow us to numb whatever it is that the pain is, as opposed to getting to the source and healing what the pain is, right? And I, that's the beauty of Robin Leonard's story, is he'll say, I share my story not because I'm some hero and I'm vulnerable, but because I'd be dead if I didn't share my story. And he's like, it got to the point where like I was at so much at the bottom that I needed to tell people about it. I needed to get help because the coping mechanisms that I was using weren't working anymore. And so now he's playing with this, ability to not drink and to not do drugs and to not, medicate his way through it. So really at the end of the day, when I look at it, it's like, people who are taking stuff to escape the pain so that they can perform, I think we should look at it in a similar category. And then the deeper part of that then, John, is what you just brought up is, okay, if someone's avoiding it for physical, how does it start to morph into emotional, right? And then vice versa. The people who are avoiding emotional, what we know now about how energy runs through our system, how does that affect their immune system? How does that affect their inflammation in their cells? And so then physical, complications start to come. So that's why they call it mind-body connection for that reason. But I think at the end of the day, pain is pain, trauma is trauma. And when we try to avoid them, that's when we really start to get into trouble.
Eric, I got one last question for you here. So you touched a little bit on how you got in contact with Theo over LinkedIn. Same for Darren. But now you guys came together and you started this podcast that will be airing soon called "We're All a Little Crazy." Can you just talk to us a little bit about how that all came together, how that conversation went, and and later on we could touch on when it's going to air its first episode and everything.
Appreciate that. So, the organization, which John was asking all the questions about the setup of the organization initially, you start with the theme and the marketing message that you're trying to get people to think about it differently and the safe place that you're creating. Then the reality that you got to do programming on the ground to help people and you need revenue streams, right? So the what I shared at the beginning, John, with, that I paid essentially for us to present at these colleges. Then, entities start to reach out to you and say, what's your fee, right? And we make it, because we're still nonprofit, donation based. So we knew to really be able to approach this topic in the way that it needs to, we needed a long form discussion format, the way that you two have, right? So take a topic like Islanders hockey. Can you communicate in one tweet about how good Palmieri is going to be for the team, or on how good Zajac is going to be for the team? Or do you need this platform to fully educate people on why you think they're either going to be great additions or not great additions, right? You need this platform. So take a topic as complicated as mental health and now say, how the hell are we going to talk about this in short form? Well, what are we patting each other on the back for when we see athletes sharing? Oh, look at this athlete who on Twitter said they have anxiety, or this athlete, or what do we do in the hockey world? Great. Everyone's retweeting Bell's Let's Talk. Theo, if you had him on, would rip the Bell's Let's Talk campaign, because if it's a telecommunications company just telling people let's talk with no direction, and every year they get hundreds of millions of retweets where the message is just let's talk about anxiety, depression, bipolar, and not let's talk about trauma and our stuff, he would say it's actually moving us further back than in the right direction, right? And because it's now separating us into the affected versus the unaffected. So Theo, Darren, and I knew we always wanted to have a long form podcast like this. In full disclosure, Robin will likely have a long form podcast like this. I think moving to a new market and it being his first year, you want to, get some things settled there first. But to have long form, so that, what the format of this conversation will be when we have them is take a current events topic, take the shooting that happened in Knoxville yesterday, take the NFL player, because I'll now bring it back to sports, that was in South Carolina that shot up his doctor and their family, right? These are topics. Let me give you an example of how poorly the media, and then I'll even put the onus on nonprofits, are talking about this. A shooting happens and immediately the media says, oh, NFL player CTE, he had concussions. Or the school shooting, right? And what do the nonprofit leaders come out and they say? They go, this has nothing to do with mental health. Mental health is not involved with school shootings. Both of those messages are completely off for educating our society of how mental health works, right? So the CTE is a checkbox of, well, this guy had head trauma when he was younger. Meanwhile, if you read this guy's story, his mother got into an accident 3 years prior and was a paraplegic. He was struggling to find a job because he was making the minimum league salary for 6 years, going to 6 different teams. He broke his ankle. His ankle went through his leg. Okay, like bone actually came out of his leg his first year, which caused him to, he believes, to be a journeyman. He stopped watching football after he retired after those 6 years because it hurt him too much to watch it. This is all the part that builds up that leads towards someone's mental health being impacted, that then leads towards outcomes like this. But what does society hear because of how the media picks it up? CTE, traumatic brain injury, and we don't learn anything from it, right?
Right.
Knoxville thing, same thing, right? What do we hear? We hear doesn't have anything related to mental health. How can you potentially bring a gun to a public place that there's many people at with the idea of shooting, or in the cases, unfortunately, of how many school shootings there have been, actually shooting people, and look at someone in the eye as a nonprofit leader in mental health and say, this incident has nothing to do with mental health? You, like, I don't mind admitting this, like when your mental health is impacted, 2 of the symptoms that happen, albeit they're to varying levels in terms of our impulse messages, are harm to ourselves and harm to others. If those are symptoms of mental health, we can be, respectful and mature as a society and say, this involved mental health on the one hand, so let's actually study it, put more funds to it, and educate people. And in the same breath say 99.9% of people who have mental health challenges are not going to shoot up a school building. You can say both those things and still be mature and responsible and it move the conversation forward. So what is my skeptic's view on why those conversations don't happen? Well, let's take the nonprofit. Where are they getting their donations from? People who self-identify in the 1 in 5 category and say, I have a mental illness. So if you have an organization now that's having your back and is saying, this has nothing to do with mental health, which people equate with mental illness, who are you going to be donating your money towards, right? So instead of thinking about how do we move society forward, we're thinking about what's good for my organization and the people that I'm maintaining as victims in this category, right? And just so no one thinks I'm a crass asshole, I'm diagnosed with PTSD. I would be in that 1 in 5 category, right? And what I'm saying is, as a society, we don't get anywhere by staying in those separate topics. So why did I just get so deep into that to answer your question, James, is because I need to explain that so that people will understand when we have this podcast the types of topics we'll dive into so that society can better understand these topics. Not that I have these grandiose plans that, it would be beautiful to get millions and millions of followers, but at least start a conversation that way. Whereas the only thing I've seen in the mental health space has been, John, tell me about your story, right? And John gives a story, and that's relatable, and that's what we do on our website. Right. But that doesn't take advantage of what long form can do in terms of really diving in and peeling away the layers of the onion on this topic. And so now, kind of, ending up that piece is there were offers and opportunities from other podcast networks. What I'll give a lot of credit to the guys from Amaze Labs, who are partners in the Hockey Podcast Network, is they were the only group that we felt like we had met with who listened to our founding story, who listened to what our objective was in terms of what we wanted to accomplish, and who we said the focus is not going to be about sports and sports only. The focus is going to be sports as a backdrop, and we are able to bring people in because of Theo and because of Darren's audience and because of access to guests we can get on.
And there's such good microcosms for the issues in larger society, right?
Absolutely.
So the NFL player that you brought up a few minutes ago, part of that is the support system that maybe doesn't exist or needs to improve in the NFL after someone retires.
Yep.
And I probably the same thing in the NHL, and both of those sports, maybe more so than things like basketball or baseball, is that the careers are really, really short, mainly due to injury. And how much that has an effect that all of a sudden some 26-year-old that's done nothing, that's all they've done is work their ass off in the ECHL and the A, where that's all they knew. They really thought it was going to last longer than that. They thought they'd beat the odds. And then they don't have anything to fall back on except for a half-done associate's degree. And of course, you're going to spiral. But there's no support system.
Right. Well, and John, take that a step further because you talked about microcosm. So yes, that's a microcosm for sports. I want to be a little bit fair to sports only because they've done a better job, not a good job yet, but a better job of player development and transition coaches and all that stuff. Needs to get way better. But what can we learn from athletes retiring at 26 to 33 years old that can help the average human being that retires at 55, 60, 65, 70, 75 years old? Is that when the thing that we woke up for every single day gets taken away from us, even sometimes by our own choice, right? Like the player who gets to go off into the sunset, like Drew Brees, right, who makes the decision. He's not injured. Maybe you could say he didn't really make the decision. He'd love to play if Father Time wasn't in place, but makes the decision. He gets to leave on his own terms. When that gets taken away from you and you don't have purpose from that anymore, where does your mind go to, right? So being able to learn from athletes and how that impacts the rest of society, so that when people turn 50 to 75 and start retiring, we could actually learn from what was the best way to transition at that point. That's helpful to us, right? And to be able to draw those parallels. So that's, when I say that the focus isn't just sports, it's that I think sports brings people together. Sports creates conversation. Sports makes us passionate. Sports drives headlines. So all those things are true. So we're not going to go away from sports, but we're going to use it as a way to also dip and dive in and out, to be able to use it as a microcosm for society at large.
Yeah, it's really cool that the Hockey Podcast Network, which we're super happy to be a part of, they've given us a lot of amazing tools. If you're watching this, you see, the graphics and things like this. James and I struggled early on trying to do some of these videos, and they make it super easy in bringing on guests. So, they're a great partner. So we're super happy to have the podcast as part of, when it first happened, and we were talking about this, and they were like, yeah, we want to have some of the guys on and blah, blah, blah. And we're going to have Theo Fleury is going to be part of this thing. And we're like, holy crap. Like this is a way bigger deal. And these guys have amazing connections. And yeah, like I said, super happy to have the podcast as part of something that we're doing. And we'll be happy to have you on whenever you want.
Absolutely.
To support the organization, promote the podcast to Islander fans. And of course, obviously have you on and talk a little bit Isles hockey.
Let me give a shout out, if you don't mind, to Islander fans, because so Robin, just quick on that story. So the way that came about was, and again, I got to be careful what details I share here. We saw Robin not getting contract offers, plural, right? Islanders or any team, after his year in Long Island, which, by the way, came after his good campaign his final year in Buffalo. Like,
yes,
he was playing at a top level. Even if he wasn't clean at that point, he was playing really well. And so I just called up Darren. I was like, oh, I don't know Robin. Robin played for the Islanders, but like, there's no way to say that mental health is not impacting GMs and coaches' willingness to give him a longer term contract. His stats are within the top 10 goalies in the league. And he just proved that he won in a first round playoff series. Like, doesn't make sense. And so Darren's like, all right, let's craft this the right way. So I'm very risk averse. Darren's obviously got a much bigger platform than I do on Twitter. And so I write it kind of the way that I just described to you. There's no way to parcel out that mental health has been involved in. Well, Darren just goes out of his way, just to be offensive with it. He's like, mental health is the reason why Robin Lehner is not getting a long-term contract, right? Like, if people look back at his tweet back in, I forget, 2 years ago, right, when free agency happened. So Robin reaches out to Darren and I, because Darren had copied us on that, or tagged, whatever you call us on it. And so I ended up having a 3.5-hour conversation with Robin that night. Wow. And a super cerebral guy for people, he doesn't get enough credit. The guy is brilliant, right? And he's talking nonstop about what he thinks there needs to be change in this space. And he asks me, just to show you that he's like an informed consumer, he said, can you send me information on these school programs that you do? I'm interested to see it. So I sent it to him. And then 2 days later, I get a text from him. You guys will find this really freaking cool. It's a picture of a drawing from Dave Art, the guy who does all the goalie masks.
Yeah.
So it's a drawing of Robin's helmet that he's planning to use in Chicago. And the hashtag is on there. And he's like, hey, man, do you mind if I use the hashtag on my helmet?
That's awesome.
Wow.
No, of course, right? I have that text saved to this day. And so wanted to give that background because there are so many Islander fans on Twitter, elsewhere, who support us who support Robin to this day because of what Robin meant to them in terms of being that champion. And I think I saw that happen in Chicago, and him being a half year there. There's people that I'm still so connected with because of the time he spent there.
Yeah.
And I talk with Robin probably once every 3 days now, maybe. You know, like
Wow.
last night on the phone after his game in LA, like he knows I stay up late, so you know he'll call me 1:32 in the morning, and the guy cares about this topic. Like,
Of course.
I want to talk to him about like that angle that he cut off in the game, and he's like, "Who'd you talk to today?" Like about the organization, you know. So
Yeah.
so just a call out to Islander fans that, you know, your support of him means a lot. He got a tattoo of Long Island.
Long Island, yeah.
And what he said to me about this fan base, this is no disrespect to any other fan base. He said, I think it was the timing of it. He said, I came in at a time where I needed them, they needed me. And the way that we meshed together, like I will forever be a fan of Long Island and those fans because I love them the way that they supported me. So hopefully, you know, more and more people continue to pull for him. I kind of have the best of both worlds. I think Islander fans will as well, in that we could root for a team in the East, we could root for a team in the West. Well, if they meet in the finals, we'll have to worry about it. But at least, you know, one of them makes it, we've got a team to root for.
Yeah,
so.
You're totally right too about how, you know, we needed him and he needed us. Like when you were just talking about him, like the hairs on the back of my neck started standing up. It's crazy, but we couldn't be happier for him now that he finally secured that long-term contract too, right? With Vegas, he signed that I think it was a 5-year extension with them. So that's great. But it's awesome to know that you have that relationship with Robin. You know, we wish him nothing but the best, and Eric, we wish you nothing but the best with this this movement. The podcast that's coming out as soon as next week. We can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We really enjoyed having you on. We're definitely, like John said, going to have to do this again. Before we wrap up, just tell our listeners when it's going to air, where it's going to air, and maybe a little bit about what you're going to be talking about if you haven't already figured it out to this point.
Sure. So thank you. So you can find it on all podcast networks at We're, so conjunction instead of We Are All a Little Crazy. Our social media tags are at SameHere_global. So the hashtag that Robin wears on his helmet at SameHere_global. We'll be promoting the different episodes there. First one airs actually coming up this Friday. So April 16th, which I know when your guys' show airs, it'll be a little bit after that, but people.
We might put it out. I'm
thinking
earlier.
We're going to put it out on Thursday.
I like this a lot, so I want to get it out as soon as possible to help you out.
Okay, thank you guys. I appreciate that. So yeah, so it'll be out as early as Friday, this coming Friday, and you know, again, this has been really cool. John, I love that you've got a nonprofit background. I love that both of you guys seem to really be into the topic, and then the kinship of, you know, loving the Isles and you know, like I said, hopefully next time we can talk about 93, because I have so many memories of that run that would be awesome to go over. So
yeah, I think you're right. It's 5 and 5, and it's to varying degrees, and you realize things in certain parts of your life, certain things happen and things add up really quickly. And I think people are getting a little bit more comfortable with it. The conversations, there's still a lot of stigma out there. There's still a lot of work to do, and you guys are doing that hard work on the ground, and anything that we can do to support it on and off the air, let us know, and we'll be there.
Yeah, we're here for you.
Thank you guys. And it's genuine for anyone who's listening. I could see it in, you know, I don't know if your listeners watch as much as they listen, but you know, I can tell from James and John, you guys are genuine dudes. So I appreciate it a lot.
We appreciate that, Eric. Once again, this is Eric Kussin from at SameHere_global movement, from the co-host of We're All a Little Crazy podcast. Eric, once again, thanks again so much for coming on, and we can't wait to do this again.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.